Welcome back to English That Works. I'm David. If you're here, you're serious about speaking English better. And that means you need to master the parts of English that trip up almost every non-native speaker. Today, we're tackling prepositions.
Hey, I'm Claire. And prepositions are one of those things that seem small, but actually affect how fluent you sound. So stick around. We're going to break down exactly why people struggle with them and what actually works to get better.
So many people freeze when they have to describe where something is, or when something happens. They know the words, they just can't put prepositions in the right place.
Right? I've heard from so many learners who say the same thing. They understand prepositions in a textbook, but actually using them in real conversation, that's where it falls apart.
Exactly. And it's not because they're not smart. It's because prepositions in English are genuinely confusing. Most people don't realize there's actually a system underneath all the seeming randomness.
So, what do people actually struggle with most? Is it the time ones, the distance ones, or something else?
Time prepositions trip up almost everyone. People will say things like in Monday or on March because they haven't internalized the pattern yet. It seems random to them.
I've noticed that too. People often ask why it's in the morning, but at night? Like there's no logic to it, right?
But there actually is logic. Most learners just don't see it because they're trying to memorize individual rules instead of understanding the system. Once people see the scale, it clicks for them.
What do you mean by the scale? Break that down for people.
So think about how people use time prepositions. In covers the big time blocks, months, seasons, years. In January, in summer, in 2024. Then on is for specific days. On Monday, on the 15th.
Okay, I see where this is going. And at is the smallest time unit?
Exactly. At is for clock times, precise moments. At 3 o'clock, at noon, at midnight. And that pattern actually makes sense once people see it. They stop thinking it's random.
So the mistake people make is not seeing that it's about the size of the time unit. They just memorize in, on, at as separate facts.
Right. And then someone asks them a question with a time preposition they haven't specifically practiced, and they freeze because they never understood the underlying pattern.
What about the ones that don't fit that pattern, like during or before or after? How do people approach those?
Those are relationship words. They show how an event relates to another point in time. People often mix those up because they're thinking about them wrong. Before and after are about sequence, not naming a time period.
So, if someone says during the meeting, they're saying something happened while the meeting was happening, not naming when the meeting was.
Exactly. And people struggle with that distinction. They think during is just another way to say when something is, like on or at. But it's different. It's about the relationship between two events.
What about for and since? Those are ones people ask about all the time.
People get those confused because they both relate to time, but in different ways. For is about duration, how long something took. Since is the starting point, when something began.
So you could say, I've been studying for 3 hours since this morning. Both work together.
Exactly. And that example really helps people understand the difference. A lot of learners just memorize use for with duration, but then forget it when they're actually speaking or writing.
So do people struggle more with time prepositions than with other types?
Definitely. Distance prepositions are actually more intuitive. From London to Paris is pretty obvious. Across the street, through the tunnel, people get those pretty quick because they're visual.
Yeah, I've noticed that. When someone can picture the movement or the space, the preposition makes sense to them right away.
Exactly. It's harder to visualize in the morning versus at night. There's no physical space to picture. So people struggle more with time prepositions than they do with spatial ones.
So what about direction prepositions? Do people get confused there too?
Direction prepositions are actually the clearest category. Into, out of, toward, away from. People understand these pretty quickly because there's clear movement happening. You can almost see it.
So the ones that are hardest are the abstract ones, not the visual ones. That makes sense.
Right. And that's why so many learners do well with some prepositions and struggle with others. It depends on how concrete the concept is. Time is abstract. Direction is concrete.
What about position prepositions, like in the room or on the table? Do people mix those up?
They do, because the same prepositions work for both time and position. In the room is position. In the morning is time. People get confused because the preposition looks the same but means different things.
So context is everything. You have to look at what's around the preposition to understand what it means.
Exactly. And that's hard for learners because they want a simple rule. They want to know in means one thing, but in can mean lots of things depending on the context.
What mistakes do you see people making most often? Like, what's the number one error?
Mixing up in and on. People say in the bus when they should say on the bus, or in Tuesday when it should be on Tuesday. Those mix-ups are super common.
Why do you think that specific mistake happens so much?
Because in a lot of other languages, the word for in and on might be the same, or the distinction might work differently. So people translate that directly into English and get it wrong.
So, it's a transfer error from their first language. That makes sense.
Right. Or they memorized a rule that doesn't actually explain the real pattern. Someone told them, use in for inside things. But then they forget that on applies to surfaces and vehicles you're physically on.
Speaking of vehicles, that's a tricky one. People say in the car in some countries, but on the bus everywhere. That's confusing, right?
That is confusing. Honestly, even native speakers have that inconsistency. In the car works because you're inside a smaller enclosed space, but on the bus because you're on top of a vehicle in a way.
So even the native speakers themselves don't have a perfect rule. They just know what sounds right.
Exactly. And that's actually good news for learners. It means they don't have to find a perfect rule. They just need to build intuition through exposure and practice.
What about phrasal verbs? People struggle with those too, right?
Oh, absolutely. People learn look as a verb, but then look after means something completely different. Turn off, turn on, turn down. All the same verb, but totally different meanings depending on the preposition.
And that's another whole layer of learning, isn't it? Because the preposition completely changes the verb's meaning.
Right. People often don't realize that phrasal verbs are a different category from regular prepositions. They try to apply the same logic, and it doesn't work. You have to learn phrasal verbs as complete units.
So, people learning English have to basically learn 3 different systems: time prepositions, spatial prepositions, and phrasal verbs.
Plus, there are relationship prepositions like with, without, for, that show connection between things. It's a lot. But the good news is that once people see the categories, it becomes manageable.
How long does it actually take someone to get good at using prepositions naturally?
It depends on how much exposure they get and how intentionally they practice. Some people get it in a few months. Others take years. The key is active engagement, not passive learning.
What do you mean by active engagement?
People can't just listen to a podcast in the background and expect prepositions to sink in. They have to actually pay attention. Notice when someone uses at versus in. Think about why. Then practice using them themselves in real contexts.
So it's observation first, then intentional practice?
Exactly. Most learners skip the observation step. They jump straight to trying to use prepositions without really understanding when and why they're used. That's why they get stuck.
What mistakes do they make when they're trying to practice?
They practice in isolation. They memorize in, on, at without context. But prepositions don't exist in isolation. You always use them with specific nouns, specific times, specific contexts. That context matters.
So they need to practice in phrases or sentences, not just the prepositions alone.
Right? In the morning, on Monday, at 3 o'clock. They need to learn and practice the whole phrase. That's how native speakers actually know which preposition is right.
Do native speakers actually think about which preposition they're using, or do they just automatically say the right one?
They don't think about it. It's automatic. That's the intuition that learners are trying to build. You can't force it. You have to build it through exposure and practice until it becomes automatic too.
So, if someone's been learning English for years and still struggles with prepositions, what does that tell us?
It probably means they haven't had the right kind of exposure or practice. They've memorized rules but haven't developed intuition. Or they're not paying attention to prepositions when they listen to English.
What's the most effective way people have found to improve?
Reading and listening to real, engaging content where they actively notice prepositions. Writing and speaking in real contexts where they have to use prepositions. Getting feedback when they use them wrong. That combination works.
So immersion plus intentional focus on this specific area?
Exactly. People can't just absorb prepositions passively. They have to actively study them while also being exposed to them in natural use. Both things together.
And when people do get prepositions right, does it noticeably improve their English?
Absolutely. It's one of those things that native speakers notice immediately. When someone uses prepositions correctly, they sound much more fluent, even if their grammar isn't perfect everywhere else.
So, it's worth the effort to really nail this down.
It really is. Prepositions are small words, but they're fundamental. They tie together basically every sentence. Get them right and your English sounds natural. Get them wrong and even fluent sentences sound off.
What would you recommend someone do this week if they want to get better at prepositions?
Pick one category. Focus on time prepositions. When they listen to English, podcasts, shows, conversations, listen specifically for how people use in, on, at with time. Write down what they hear.
Just observation, not trying to use them yet?
Right. Spend a week just noticing. Don't worry about using them yet. Just build awareness. See the patterns. Next week, start using them intentionally when they speak or write.
That's a much less overwhelming approach than trying to memorize all the rules.
Exactly. And that approach actually works because it builds intuition instead of just adding to someone's mental checklist of rules they're trying to remember while they speak.
If you found this helpful and you're working on getting better at English, subscribe to English That Works. We break down exactly this kind of stuff every single week. Grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, real conversation skills.
Everything you need to speak English confidently. New episodes every Monday. Don't miss them. And let us know in the comments what part of English gives you the most trouble. We might make an episode about it.
Thanks for watching. You've got this. Keep practicing. See you next time.